Is it October yet? Why, yes it is. The first round of cuts has finally been made from the Habs training camp, so it's a good time for us to take stock of this year's Laval Rocket roster. Who's back, who's not, and who's new. Welcome back to the channel, friends. I'm Amy Johnson, a credentialed journalist covering the Montreal Canadiens AHL affiliate for the past 10 years. The Laval Rocket do open their training camp on Tuesday this week. They've got a number of familiar faces and some new signings, as well as some tryouts on the camp roster. But all of this is in preparation for just 2 preseason games that they'll play this year. Those will take place later this week. Both of them will be played in Belleville, but one of those games will be played against the Belleville Senators, and one of them will be played against the Toronto Marlies, similar to the setup that they had for preseason last year, where all 3 teams kind of met in one central location to knock out a couple of preseason games against a couple of different division opponents. But since we last met here on the Rocket Hockey Report, things have changed. As they tend to do in the AHL, there is typically a lot of roster turnover in the offseason, and that is certainly the case once again here this year. So I just want to bring you basically kind of the roster makeup for camp this year, aside from the tryouts, where we talk about who is back, who is returning to the Rocket from last year, which Rocket members from last year will not be back with the team this year, and as well introduce you, in case you missed some of the news over the summer, to some of the new faces who have been brought on board. So I'm actually going to kick things off with who isn't returning to the Laval Rocket, because this is an easy list of names to get out of the way in case you were looking to see them back in a Rocket uniform this year. A lot of these guys have left to play in Europe. There are a handful who will be playing for other AHL teams. So let's get right to it. This list is in no particular order. Here are some guys who are not returning to the Laval Rocket this year. Philip Cederquist won't be back. Jan Mysak won't be back. Remember, he was traded away last year. Arnaud Durando will not be back. Nathan Legare. The Rocket will see him this year as he is going to be playing with the Utica Comets within their division. Gabriel Bourque. And that's an interesting one because Bourque was the captain last year, which means we should see a new Laval Rocket captain this year. We'll have to wait to see who that's going to be. Philippe Maillet will not be back with the organization. Neither will Riley McKay, Nolan Yaremko, Alex Olivier Voyer. Noah Lauan will not be back with the organization. He will be playing with Rochester, again within the division for Laval. Brady Keeper will not be back. Matthias Norlander will not be back. Olivier Galipeau, John Parker Jones, Toby Bisson, who interestingly enough will be playing for the Syracuse Crunch now, under the tutelage once again of Joel Bouchard. You remember that when Bisson had most of his success with the Rocket, it was when Joel Bouchard was the head coach of the organization. They have been reunited again. Gustav Lindstrom won't be back with the team this year. Neither will Nicholas Baudin, Casimir Kaskasuo, or Strauss Mann. Phew. That's a lot of names that won't be back this year. But again, that is very typical in the AHL. There is always a big roster turnover in the offseason. So with all of those names off the books, there were, of course, some new names that came in, and there were some names from last year that we can expect to see back in training camp this week. I have my handy-dandy list here. We're going to go through and separate this down by forwards, defensemen, and goaltenders. We'll talk about those who are returning. We'll talk about those who are new, as well as some of these are going to be guys that have not yet been cut from Canadiens camp. And so there's going to be a bit of a question mark of which ones of them will actually end up on Laval's roster this year. But we'll get to that in a minute. So for the forwards, now these are in alphabetical order. We have Vincent Arsenault. Arsenault is a new player coming in this year. He is a 32-year-old forward. He played in the AHL last year. They've signed him to a contract this year. Another new face to the team this year is Alex Bocage, another forward. He is 22. He has split his time last year between the ECHL and the AHL. He was drafted by Colorado in the 3rd round in 2019. Owen Beck, cut from Canadiens camp. He will be playing on the Laval Rocket this year, as will Lucas Kandata, who, along with another player, cleared waivers out of Canadiens camp just on Monday. Laurent Dauphin is back with the Rocket again. Last year it was Toby Bisson coming back. This year it's Laurent Dauphin coming back. He returns after playing in Europe last year. Jared Davidson will be with the Rocket this year. Sean Farrell. Brandon Gignac is back. He is the other player who had to clear waivers this week in order to be assigned to the Laval Rocket. Emil Heineman is still with the organization. However, he is still up with the Montreal Canadiens in training camp, so it's yet to be seen as to whether or not he's going to stay there to start the season or if he will come down to Laval. Riley Kidney is with Laval this year. Philip Méchard is with Laval this year. Israel Mianskum. Now, Israel Mianskum is a guy who's got a 2-year contract, but the first year of it is a two-way AHL deal, which tends to make me think that Israel Mianskum will likely start the season in Trois-Rivières, but we will have to wait to see if that comes to fruition. Yakov Novak will be back, of course, as will Jacob Perreault. He was the player that the Canadiens acquired for Jan Mysak in that trade earlier this year. Luke Tuck, of course, going to be with the Laval Rocket after making some pretty good impressions in Montreal Canadiens training camp last week, as well as Florian Jacki. I will also mention Joshua Waugh should be on this list as well. Again, he, like Heineman, is still up with the Canadiens in training camp. We don't know yet if he will stay there or if he will come down to Laval. I tend to think that he'll be sent to Laval, but we'll have to wait to see. And for me, as far as the forwards go, other players who are up with Montreal or under Montreal's roster at the moment who could appear in Laval: Alex Barre-Boulet, Raphael Harvey-Pinard, but he's currently, of course, injured, and Michael Pezzetta, because there's going to be some battling in training camp for the Habs as to who is going to occupy those fourth-line positions and so forth. So maybe we'll see Heineman and Waugh come back, or maybe one or both of them manage to make the roster, and that means someone else would have to come down to Laval. So we just have to wait to see how that shakes out. On the defensive side of things, Adam Engstrom still up with the Canadiens in their training camp, but I imagine that he will be playing in Laval to start the season. Zach Hayes is a new face on the blue line for Laval this year. He is a defenseman. He's another one that has an AHL two-way contract, so I believe that he could also be one who could start the season in Trois-Rivières. Josh Jacobs is another new face to Laval this year. He was signed 28 years old, played in the AHL last season. He was drafted in the second round in 2014 by the New Jersey Devils. So Josh Jacobs joining the Laval Rocket this year. As well, Chris Jandrick will be back. The next two guys we know are still up with the Canadiens: Logan Mailloux, David Reinbacher. I believe Logan Mailloux is with Lane Hutson vying for those coveted defense positions on Montreal's opening night roster. So I think it'll be a while yet until we see whether or not Mailloux sticks with the Habs or gets sent back to Laval to start the season. Reinbacher, we don't know the extent of his injury yet, so he's a big unknown at this level. We have another new defenseman, Vincent Sevigny. He is a 23-year-old who played in the AHL last season, so he is also new to the team. William Trudeau, of course, is back. He's been sent down from Montreal Canadiens training camp. Last but not least, we have Tyler Wotherspoon, another new defenseman brought in over the summer. Tyler Wotherspoon played for Utica last season, actually. He's a 31-year-old who was drafted in the second round in 2011 by Calgary, and I actually think that this is one of Laval's better free agent signings in the offseason. Tyler Wotherspoon is a really good, solid veteran defenseman who can provide some really good guidance and mentorship to the younger guys on the blue line. I really liked that signing over the summer. Just like the forwards, since we don't know how the competition for certain positions on the blue line in Habs training camp is going to go, if any of the young guys or a number of the young guys who are still up with the Habs stick with the Habs, then we could see other members of the blue line sent to Laval. Those could be Jaden Struble, Arbor Jackeye, or even Justin Barron, who Barron would have to clear waivers in order to come to Laval. So that adds a little bit of complexity in terms of making a decision on what to do with Barron. But those three could also be guys that we could see in a Laval uniform to start the season. We just don't know yet. Last but not least, we have the goaltenders, one of which is still up with the Montreal Canadiens in training camp, but I expect that we'll see him come down maybe even after Tuesday night's game against Ottawa. That's Jakub Dobeš, who has done a very commendable job in his preseason action for the Montreal Canadiens. I think he is going to pick up right where he left off with Laval last year, which was a very strong second half to the season, and I think he'll be an exciting number one to watch in the AHL this year. I think he's all set to make some pretty big strides in his development and progression, and he'll be backed up by Connor Hughes in the net. There are two other goaltenders, Luke Kavelin and Hunter Jones. I believe both of them will likely be in Trois-Rivières as call-up options if Dobeš gets called to the Canadiens at any point this season. But it's a pretty exciting lineup. There's a lot of young talent ready to kind of take the stage for Laval. Believe it or not, you remember last year we said, okay, get ready. The Laval Rocket just got a lot younger with a lot of young up-and-coming talent, so be ready for them to be maybe a little bit on shaky ground to start the season, and that ended up being the understatement of the year last season because they really had a rocky start before they turned things around in January last year. Well, believe it or not, this year's Laval Rocket roster is actually younger than last year's. The average age for the Laval Rocket this season looks to be around 23.6 years old. That is actually the lowest average in Laval's 7-year history. So I say that for two reasons. One, temper those expectations. Remember, there are going to be a lot of guys who are starting to play pro hockey for the first time in their careers, and there is going to be an adjustment period. However, I don't think the adjustment period is going to be as drastic as last year because while this team, the makeup of this team might be slightly younger than last year's, I think the talent level has increased over last year's. So I think that will balance out any discrepancy in the age. I think Laval is going to be a young, exciting, and dynamic team to watch this year. Oh, and wait. Forgot to introduce you or remind you that there's a couple of other new faces, including the head coach. That's right. Jean-Francois Houle is no longer with the organization. It is Pascal Vincent who has come in, taken over as the bench boss, and he has a keen eye for development, and that's very exciting. We're going to see how he sets up these young prospects to succeed and puts them in tough situations, lets them make mistakes, and lets them learn how to play professional hockey, get them ready for that transition to the NHL. Also, there is one other assistant coach who is new, sort of. He's one who's back after an absence, and that's Daniel Jacob. He was always Joel Bouchard's right-hand man. He followed Bouchard from Laval to out to San Diego when he was coaching the Gulls in the AHL. He was even coaching in Syracuse with Joel Bouchard last year. Daniel Jacob wanting, I guess, to return home to Quebec and be closer to family, and so he is back behind the bench with the Laval Rocket. And of course, Martin Laperriere is still there, as is Marco Marciano. So it is an exciting time for the Laval Rocket, and, you know, it's been a rough kind of past few days for Habs fans with the seriousness of the injuries that took place last weekend for the Montreal Canadiens with Patrick Laine and David Reinbacher leaving the game. But all hope is not lost, and I think Laval is going to be a real bright spot in the organization this year. I can't wait to be here every week to bring you all of the updates and the latest news about the Laval Rocket every Tuesday here on the Rocket Hockey Report. And I've been watching these prospects and a lot of these guys who have now been cut and reporting to Laval's camp. I've been watching them in their preseason action with the Montreal Canadiens last week. And really in the first two preseason games, it told me a lot about what I was seeing. And I had 15 preseason takeaways based off those first 2 games. And if you'd like to hear what I thought about how the young guns and some of those veterans performed in the first 2 games of the Habs preseason, well then you should check out this video right here, and I'll see you again next week.